Welcome to the Creative Push, an intimate and diverse artist interview series. Here, artists and makers of all kinds share tips, advice, knowledge, and inspiration that you can learn from. I'm your host, Sherry O'Neill, a photographer, artist, writer, and educator. This series is a part of the Learn and Create platform to help artists further their education in creativity, art, and business. Welcome to the Creative Push. Today I have James Suh. He started Taco Diplomacy. He has decided to combine his love of Korean culture into the food that he's making. And today we're going to talk a little bit about what he's working on, his recipes, and his love of coffees because he also is a barista. Welcome, James.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Tell me about your path where you are now, where your love of food came from. Were there any influences in your family?
Yeah, I was actually born in South Korea in 1972. We're still in sort of a post-war stance when I was growing up. I remember a lot about South Korea, some of the flavors and foods that I ate over there. Most notably, something called tteokbokki, which is a really spicy rice cake. And I used to eat that even as a 4 or 5-year-old roaming through the streets of South Korea. When I came to the U.S., just before I turned 7, I started to have a longing or sort of started to miss the flavors that I had in Korea, but just really did not have access to that for years. When I turned into an adult, I found a Korean restaurant. I think I was living in Orlando at the time and tried to get a few of the ingredients. I had no idea how to make the recipe. This was back in the early 90s and started to dabble with it and spent the better part of 15 to 20 years trying to recreate these flavors that I remembered. And it wasn't until pretty recently that I started to piece a few things together, connect with individuals, and start making other food. The flavors beyond the tteokbokki, I started to remember around, bulgogi and all of the barbecue type dishes and the banchans in Korean cooking. I started to pick that up as well because in many places that I lived, there was really not a Korean restaurant available. So I wanted to, as closely as possible replicate those foods. As a kid, I did not have a traditional family situation. So I wound up making for myself, even as a young kid, my own food. So digging through the pantry, seeing if I could find anything I could scrap together. So even, at 8, 9, 10 years old, I started to really understand flavors, what tasted good. Maybe not to everybody, but it tasted good to me. So kind of pulled all that stuff together. And I think that's evolved over time into a pretty strong appreciation for how to pull things together that a broader number of individuals would enjoy. And I was speaking of the kind of the transition out of the consulting space. I'm in the data analytics industry, do a lot of data and strategy consulting. And I was telling my wife, I've never, ever made anybody happy with data. People are excited, they're interested, they like seeing it, and it helps drive business value or enterprise value. But no one's come up and said, hey, I'm really happy. I love this data so much. Can you make me some more? When I make tacos or tteokbokki or some of the gimbap, the Korean rolls, guacamole, or a variety of other things, people are genuinely happy. They love it. And I think that in turn brings me a little bit of joy. So I want to use this downtime. Everyone's calling it the Great Resignation. We all have different reasons for looking for different opportunities, different roles and jobs. This feels to me a good time to explore something that I really enjoy. If it doesn't work, I'm in a fortunate position to be able to step back into a high demand position doing data work. So I feel like taking the risk right now is certainly worth the effort. And the initial responses have been really positive.
As a kid, you spent a lot of time by yourself and food became a part of your own necessity. So you played with that because you had to create your own meals.
Yeah, it was that. And there was not much around either. So you had to get really creative. When I was maybe 12, 13 years old, my sister and I were scrounging around for food and I just mixed a few ingredients together, popped it in the microwave, and it was actually a pretty delicious sweetbread, just some water, sugar, a little bit of flour and a few other things. And we invented ghetto bread and we just used to eat that like multiple times a day. And actually my sister and her kids still eat it today. I have 3 siblings, one older one that grew up with me in Korea, and then 2 once we moved to the U.S. that are stepsisters.
What brought you to the U.S.?
My biological mother, met an Army soldier. He was enlisted in the Army. He happened to be stationed in Korea, and they met and they started dating, and they decided to get married and move us to the United States.
You were 7 when you came to the U.S.?
right before I turned 7.
Where did you move to?
We went from Seoul, South Korea to San Francisco, and we lived in a place I think a lot of people may know it as the Presidio. It used to be an old army base, and now it's a much nicer development and park, but we lived there for about a year, and then we moved to Izmir, Turkey shortly afterwards, and we lived in Turkey for 2 years. I actually was in Turkey during the military coup, the 1980 military coup, which was quite a fascinating time to be in that country.
So fast forward through the years, when you were in college and all that, were you still working on recipes, enjoying the joys of creating food and coffee?
Yeah, I will say I never had recipes, and this is one of the things that I'm struggling with now as I'm trying to start a restaurant, because everything that I've done in the past as a child and a young adult was improvisational because I had to work with what I had. So even the recipes for the tteokbokki or the Korean tacos or the bulgogi, I'm just putting it together based on what I feel like is the right amount, and they all come out, I think, pretty good. Some of them are exceptional. I'm learning a lot to put my recipes down on paper, put specific amounts, and then adjust from there. I don't recall ever formally trying to cook, but when we had events, Thanksgiving, Christmas, birthdays, I always jumped in the kitchen and I was always eager to help, and I was interested to learn what somebody else was doing or even take the lead. For instance, I really genuinely do not like turkey, but I love making turkey because it's like such a complex thing to do. There's a right way to do it, there's a wrong way to do that, and I enjoy making it. I like carving it, but I generally do not eat turkey.
There's a lot of creativity involved in developing your own flavors. How long have you been actually making what you're making here and sharing it with other people? You said you made these recipes kind of for yourself growing up. When did you start sharing those with other people?
I have 4 kids, so some of the simpler things, the seaweed rolls with sesame seed and salt, essentially their entire lives. Anytime we have friends over, if I know them well enough and understand that they're a little bit more exploratory or adventurous in their eating, then I may make something a little bit more creative on the Korean side, the bulgogi. When I met my current wife, we started having more folks over, and Korean tacos became a relatively regular staple for us. We had really good positive interactions, so I just started making that multiple times a year. And then that evolved into a few of the other recipes. I'd assumed because of people's reactions to Korean food to be, especially kimchi and some of the more pungent type foods, that most people did not enjoy or like Korean cooking. So I kind of avoided that, sort of kept it in my back pocket and did it for myself. I'm realizing now that a lot more people have had the exposure to and are starting to enjoy Korean food in a way that I didn't appreciate. And then you get things like Parasite or the music group BTS with K-pop or the Squid Game, and people are so exposed, if not overexposed, to some of the intrigue and beauty of Korean culture that, what better way to learn and understand that culture than through the food. So I think the opportunity is really great to share something I loved with a much broader audience that may not have been open to or even aware of it, even a few months or a few years ago.
So your stepfather's military background kind of wore on you to where you decided you wanted to be a part of the military as well? Was that part of that influence?
No, interesting. I've lived in a lot of different places. We went from San Francisco to Turkey, and then upstate New York. We lived in Kansas. Then I went to high school in San Antonio. And then from there, I joined the Navy, went to Orlando and got into the nuclear power program. Went to South Carolina for prototype training. So I was working on a sub-reactor, getting qualified. Then I went to university in upstate New York, moved from there down to Virginia, did training in Quantico, and then North Carolina for the Marine Corps. Then I moved up to New Jersey and back to DC after spending a year in Iraq with the Marine Corps, and then moved to Tennessee in 2004. So just lived everywhere. I got exposure to a lot of different foods, people, cultures.
Kind of gave you a fresh start.
Possibly. I think that was a little bit more subconscious. My high school situation wasn't fantastic. I actually wound up living in a stolen car a good part of my senior year in high school. I didn't really feel like I had a lot of options. Despite that, I graduated top 5% of my class, but nobody, based on where I was living and what I was doing, gave me any indication that I could go to college. The military wound up being more of an escape for me and maybe a life reset. I knew military was an option because of my stepfather. My biological father was also in the military as well, so it was obviously a path that I saw as a reality.
The joy of actually starting to create food started in Orlando, is that correct? When you were looking for places to eat?
But yeah, once I got in, I really started to enjoy it. I thrived in that, enough structure to allow me to have, that Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that security and that safety piece, so I could start looking for and exploring other aspects of my life, including cooking. When my parents' stepdad or mother did cook, it was not very pleasant. My stepdad used to get frozen peas and a can of tuna fish, mix it with mayonnaise, and pour it over some egg noodles, and that was dinner. It was not pleasant, and I always felt that there's better options out there. When I went to Orlando, that was one of the first places where I found a Korean restaurant, a fully functional Korean restaurant with all the flavors that I had not had in almost 15 years. So it brought back a lot of memories and an interest in those flavors again. So I started consuming copious amounts of Korean food just to kind of catch up, I think, for lost time.
Tell me your favorite few dishes, what you like to create. If you were creating your own menu right now, what would be the top items?
Actually, I like simple flavors. So one of my favorite things when I'm incredibly hungry is making a pot of steamed rice, literally nothing in there, steamed white rice, no flavors, and then getting a sheet of seaweed and spreading sesame seed oil all over that, and then sprinkling with salt, roasting that, and then just wrapping that around rice. So it just has a really nice balance of carbs, salt, oil, crunch. Brings back some nostalgia, but it sort of fills, Japanese call it umami. It has that in a way that you require a lot more complexity, a lot more proteins to get in many other foods. So that's among one of my favorites. Spice, I think it's kind of a joke. I can't find food that's spicy enough for me. So if I'm creating something for myself, I'm always going to look for things that really kick it up a notch. With the tteokbokki, you can make it incredibly spicy. It doesn't necessarily have to be. It has a little bit of sugar in there.
What's in the tteokbokki?
The tteokbokki is a Korean rice cake called duck. It's made with sticky rice, the sweet rice, maybe some rice flour, and then it's worked into what looks like a really, really thick spaghetti noodle. And then the sauce, it is based on a soup stock that has a little bit of seaweed, some anchovies that are boiled down into it, some daikon radish, some onions or scallions, and a little bit of sugar, and you boil that down for a few hours just to get all the flavors out. Then you add gochujang, which is a really flavorful fermented Korean hot bean paste, and add a little bit of tamari in there as well, and then a bit more sugar if you like. There's a Korean seasoning, it's called gochugaru, which is similar to red pepper flake, but it has a very, very distinct flavor, so you mix some of that in there for some extra heat and texture, and you boil that down a little bit, and then you add the tteokbokki, the rice cake, and it turns into a really delicious dish. I actually put some cheese sauce on top. I had seen this a number of years ago and just was shaking my head that somebody would really mess with the perfect recipe, and I started doing this a few days ago and just exploring it, and it's actually good. I should have tried it a while ago.
So you surprised yourself by using the cheese.
I did. I just couldn't understand how cheese was introduced into Korean cuisine because it's just not something I'd ever seen before, but it is definitely starting to take off as a ingredient of choice.
Tell me about the pickled radish. Do you make those yourself or do you buy those already made?
I actually do make these at times. The ones that are on here are purchased in a store. They take about, if you want to do it right, probably about 4 or 5 weeks to pickle. It's really simple recipe, but it is just daikon radish. Inside there, it has turmeric to turn it bright yellow, and then it's really just rice wine vinegar and sugar. Boil it down, mix it all together, and let it sort of sit and ferment for a few weeks. It has a wonderful flavor, and then it absorbs all of the turmeric colors.
Let's talk about the Korean tacos, which are my favorites. I've been to 2 little pop-ups you've done, one in your front yard and one down the street here at the restaurant. Can you tell me how that came to be? Is that your own creation?
I think Korean tacos started off in a little food truck on the West Coast, but it hasn't necessarily made its way to the degree that I would have expected to in Nashville. Everybody has their own unique style of Korean taco. One of the more common themes, though, is to have the bulgogi, whether it's the beef bulgogi or the pork or chicken, depending on if you want a little bit of spice or the type of meat that you want. There's also a tofu version. I actually have a very different blend of flavors. There's a base, it's called muche. It's kind of a lightly pickled Korean radish with a little bit of carrots in there. I let it sit for a few days to absorb some of the flavors. I use a heavy amount of that as the base, and then some bulgogi on top. I make the red sauce. It's really gochujang with some rice wine vinegar, a little bit of sugar in there, and a few other secret seasonings.
Now, is that a spicy sauce?
It's spicy, sweet. I think most people that can eat black pepper without needing a drink of water, they can generally handle the gochujang, the spicy sauce, because it's really cut nicely with the rice wine vinegar.
So would you say that's kind of your version of your own sriracha?
I think so. It probably does not have the universal flavors or use that sriracha does or Pete's Red Hot or something like that. But if I can, I put it on just about anything. Whether it's straight gochujang or the mix that I make, put as the taco sauce, I'll put that on.
And what is the meat inside of the Korean taco?
The Korean taco, we use ribeye. It's sliced incredibly thin. There's a very special marinade that we make for that. Typically consists of a lot of ginger, garlic, onions, and something that's acidic like a fruit. Typically, you'll see Koreans using the Asian pears. I started using a yellow kiwi. So it provides some sweetness, but then enough acidity to help break down the meat and tenderize it a little bit. And then you use some tamari or soy sauce. I put some gochujang in there, sesame seed oil. There's a lot of interesting ingredients in that, but it just adds a tremendous amount of flavor to the meat. And then you let it set. I typically let it sit for 1 or 2 days just to absorb all the flavors. And then you grill it on an incredibly hot surface and pop in a taco.
Tell us about the tortillas, because you're making those yourself as well.
Tortillas are a bit interesting to me. I went to a few of my favorite taco shops around town and look on the shelves, and I see bags and bags of store-bought tortillas, and they're okay. Typically not as fresh as I would like. One thing that I think is missing in tortillas in many of the restaurants is maybe a unique flavor profile. The tortilla is such an important part of the taco, certainly on the Korean taco side or the German taco that we make, that I wanted to start exploring more flavors. So I have a tortilla that is half flour, half corn tortilla. We put black pepper, use some butter in there and mix that, and it complements the German taco really well and works really nicely with the Korean taco. I've been working on that for the better part of 6 months, and I think getting the recipe down, it's starting to turn out really nicely. And then for the Irish taco that we made, that is actually a potato and flour, no other ingredient there, and a little bit of black pepper and salt just for some seasoning in that. And that actually makes a really wonderful taco that complements all of the Irish flavors that we've sort of tossed in there. So, you can have a generic taco off the shelf and everything's going to be okay, but why waste that platform or that medium to sort of explore additional flavors?
Hey guys, thanks for listening. I hope you're enjoying the Creative Push. These artist interviews are a labor of love, but it sure would help if you'd consider supporting this podcast with a small monthly donation to help sustain the work and time it takes for me to produce future episodes. You can click the support button, or you can click the link below in the show notes. Any support is greatly appreciated, and you can cancel at any time. Either way, I'm glad to have you here. Please subscribe and share. Now let's get back to the show. You mentioned a German taco. Can you tell us what's in that?
Yeah. My best friend is German, and we were sitting around, and the conversation I had with him was one of the reasons I started the taco diplomacy. So we had said, why are there only Mexican tacos or Tex-Mex tacos and maybe some Korean tacos but nothing else? Certainly not in broad circulation. And we started throwing out countries. I'm like, yeah, what about a German taco? Like, what would you find in a German taco? Obviously, you would have sauerkraut and probably a bratwurst or a currywurst, and you definitely have to have some potatoes in there and probably a mustard sauce. And we stepped back and we're like, wait, that actually sounds like a pretty darn good taco. So we were kind of goofing off, and I thought of the sour dictator, which is the sauerkraut, the sausage, and the potato. So a few weeks later, we kind of got all the ingredients together and pulled that one. And it was pretty darn delicious. The sauerkraut was a little bit mushy for our taste. So from the sauerkraut, I actually removed that and started doing a kraut slaw, which is a uncooked, very, very lightly pickled version of sauerkraut, I think. And it added a really wonderful crunch to that. So just kind of pull all those ingredients together. It's not my favorite because I love spice. This is genuinely an unspicy, very European, very German taco.
It has a sauce in it too, right?
It does. The sauce is a kind of a mustard vinegar sauce that we sort of diluted down to spread on top. But one of the things that I wanted to do in taco diplomacy and in exploring the flavors is to try as best we can not to do a lot of fusion cooking. I don't want Korean flavors to be lost in a sea of other flavors, or someone to be confused whether this is a German taco or an Irish taco or a French taco. When someone tastes the flavors, I want them to say, hey, this is really great. I've never seen it in this format. And this is definitely a Korean taco, or this is definitely a German taco. And that part's important to me, I think, because of that nostalgia that I'm really looking to get into. It's difficult to feel that warm, nostalgic feeling when that food, just something doesn't taste quite right because you've introduced a crazy ingredient that you've never tasted before when you were living or growing up in a certain country.
And today with our photo shoot, you made rolls. So can you explain a little bit about the rolls that you made?
Yeah, it's called gimbap. There's a lot of different recipes for it. There's a few traditional recipes that Koreans use. I mix it up a little bit on this one just based on what ingredients I had around. I had cucumber, so I put some cucumber in there. I like the fresh, crunchy taste. I'm starting to use takwon, this pickled daikon radish, in just about anything because it has a really nice sweetness, so that's in there as well. The egg omelet that we make, I actually dice up scallions very thinly and cook it into the egg, add a little bit of salt. That's legitimately it. And the scallions, when they cook down, add just a really nice sweetness to the egg, which translates into the roll. The rice, I just like the purple color. It's really nice set against the yellow of the daikon, and I'm usually not super artistic or creative, but I look for things like that. So the purple rice is actually just white rice mixed with some barley and black rice. And the black rice, once you rinse it out and cook it, lets out a really nice purple flavor, which absorbs into the white stuff. Put that all together, rolled it up, and put a little bit of sesame seed oil on the outside and sprinkle some salt. And yeah, it's got some great flavors.
So you've been working in the world of business consulting for quite some time. You decided that you were going to experiment with some recipes to have a taco pop-up. We interviewed Karri for one of the Creative Push articles a couple weeks ago. She makes beautiful cakes. Did you want to do the food and combine flavors with her maybe somehow? Did you guys kind of put your heads together, or was this all your own creation? You wanted your own outlet?
That's an interesting question. COVID's been interesting for a lot of people. Karri and I were both married before, and I think had we been married with our exes during COVID, things would have not gone really well. And I think it didn't go really well for a lot of folks. What she and I found was that we were incredibly compatible in spending copious amounts of time together in confined space. We have a lot of shared interests. She loves baking. She loves cooking. I've enjoyed it to an extent that I will carve time out of my week and day just to do that. I think seeing Karri explore the baking side and gaining some traction in something that she just enjoys doing and seeing it as a potential way to make a living off of intrigued me a little bit. So I started thinking about the idea of producing something very similar. So I think if I do launch an official brick and mortar business, she's definitely going to be involved. We're going to have a lot of cakes because taco diplomacy is really not about tacos. It's about introducing international flavors in familiar forms. Cake is a familiar form. Coffee is a familiar form. Tacos are familiar forms, and street foods. She definitely was an inspiration. I don't imagine I would be doing this if she wasn't also interested in doing something similar to that.
Had you ever considered doing anything like that pre-COVID?
Oh gosh, no. I'm in the data world. Everyone wants data. They pay lots of money for data consultants to come in and help solve complex problems. So I think before then, I was just looking at different opportunities. I started a data consulting business in 2017 and thought that was the way of the future. Earlier, I think during COVID, just a few things happened in my career that gave me a little bit of reset. I was actually sitting down to dinner with a group of executives, and we were doing a get-to-know-you session because we hadn't gotten together in quite some time as a group. And one of the questions that came up was, hey, tell me something you've done in the past that you're not particularly proud of. And we all have these stories, right? Like no one's perfect, so we all make mistakes, do something stupid, and this is sort of a let your guard down moment. So the executive that asked that question, I think he goes last and answers a question, and he says, yeah, when I graduated high school, didn't go directly to college, I got a job at a retail outlet, and over the course of 18 months, I stole $35,000 in cash and merchandise. That was sort of a reset for me instantly. I'm like, what in the world am I doing? Who am I associating myself with? And the idea that I was spending my time helping people like that generate more wealth just really made my stomach turn. There's so many things wrong about that statement, not the least of which was the tepid reaction from the other executives around the table. They did not react to that information the way they should have reacted to it. So it told me that the environment, the business community it was generally sick. It was unhealthy for a lot of folks, and it wasn't a place that I felt like I could have the type of impact that I wanted to have. So I did a couple things. One of them was I chose to step out of that consulting field for companies like that, and now I'm spending my time doing consulting work for non-for-profit. So I spend time right now working with Make-A-Wish Middle Tennessee, so they're a client of mine. And then I've got a little bit more free time. I don't want to burn myself out. So I decided to explore food because, again, I can make people happy with food. And I think I make myself happy with food as well.
Tell me about the coffee. Give me a little bit of an overview of what drives you for the joy of coffee, where that came from.
I do a few things. I like solving puzzles. And I think because I grew up largely on my own, I like solving puzzles on my own. It's not that I don't like asking for help. I've never had anyone around to help. So I just have not gotten comfortable that there are people out there that are willing to help. Even something as simple as making coffee. Over the years, I've just picked up little tiny things, skill sets. And if I have an interest in that, then I'm going to spend an enormous amount of time just trying to figure it out. About 4.5 years ago, I picked up my first coffee machine. It's a Breville. It wasn't cheap, just a few $100. I started making coffee for folks, and I made some pretty terrible coffee, but over time, over the course of about 1.5 years, I started making some tweaks and adjustments, and I really maxed out that coffee. So, I figured out the grind size a little bit, and how do you froth milk with a single boiler, low pressure machine? What kind of coffees do I need? When I outgrew that machine, I bought another used machine, much nicer, Pasquini, but somebody was selling it for a few $100. They hadn't taken care of it, so it took me, a few months to kind of get it in working order. And then I started to max that one out, bought a decent grinder for a few $100, and started playing with different types of coffee varieties, tamp pressure and things. And over time, I maxed that out, and about 1 year or so ago, I decided to kind of go for my dream machine. So I found one that was a really nice double boiler, and I do enjoy coffee. I like drinking it, but if I made it and somebody else was drinking it, I'm actually even happier because you can only drink so many of those. It's one of those things that on the surface appear incredibly easy to do, right? You just sort of grind some beans, you push a button, then you frost some milk, and you toss somebody a glass of warm milk with some caffeinated coffee beans in there. But there's so much nuance to it that, I don't know, it's something, and I don't play golf, but I understand sort of the nuance. No one can perfect golf. You can never be perfect at it. But the pursuit of that perfection, I think, is really meaningful. And this is where I've kind of gotten frustrated with the state of business and the world economy. Starbucks has the people, they have the equipment, they have the beans to genuinely make a good cup of coffee if they wanted to. But the priorities are elsewhere. And I believe, whether it's a taco or the tteokbokki or work, data analytics or coffee, if you have the ability to do something right and you can do it, you should. We, I think as a society, and I'm guilty of this myself, I've sort of forgotten what it means to get things done right. We have 5-star reviews. Let's say for an Uber driver, I gave somebody a 4-star review, and instantly Uber sends me a message saying, hey, what did we do wrong? What can we improve better? Meaning if it's not a 5-star, it's a complete failure. So now they've so lowered the bar to what a 5-star means that it's actually meaningless. So most Starbucks coffee by that definition is probably a 5-star or 4-star coffee. In the definition, if you relate that to what they're capable of producing, it's at best a 2-star coffee. And oftentimes it's a 1-star coffee.
What does creativity mean to you, and what inspires you to create?
I don't know, maybe with many things in life, creativity is really driven by or born out of necessity. And for me, my need to improvise, whether it's to survive or find food or, figure out what my next steps are, that improvisation just being a necessity started to evolve into something that I became very comfortable with. And then beyond just sort of the survival piece, you start to take that same skill set and apply it to other things. So I could go into the kitchen, doesn't really matter what we have or what we don't have, and just open a few things up and say, that probably tastes pretty good. Try a few things out, some success, some failures, and you sort of adjust from that. Some people go in and they know exactly what they want to do, and they can be very creative within the framework that they've already outlined for themselves. I tend to be very, maybe a little bit more abstract. I don't need a framework. I just jump in and try to do something that's similar or close to what I want, and then I just kind of adjust from there. If you look at, I have an engineering background, and if you see some of my artistic pieces, they're all literally straight lines and perfect circles. I don't have that sort of visual creativity, I guess. So, and in my mind, that's how I define creative. I'm not a musician. I don't sing.
Is yours a little more analytical, problem solving?
Yeah.
Like your career as a business consultant, you're having to solve a problem with, in your instance, might be flavors that you're wanting to create, right, and how to join those together.
Yeah, definitely, and much more in that context. Definitely a little bit more left brain than right brain on that. I think my biggest problem with the recipes is I get something that is really good and then I have a sigh because I didn't write it down. Like, what in the world? Like, what proportions did I use? Like, what didn't I use? So with the tortillas, I had actually over the last few months some really good recipes, and I could not for the life of me remember what the fat ratio was on there, how much baking powder did I use, or how much did I need it. So very recently, over the last month or so, I started writing everything down, timing and stuff, so it's becoming a little bit more routine. That hurts me a little bit because I love being creative, but I also appreciate that you can't do anything to scale, even the limited scale of a pop-up restaurant, if you don't have some processes and structure down.
Do you get stuck with your recipes?
Yeah, even doing that piece, I was not even sure I wanted to really do the restaurant, but we had a little cake tasting a number of months ago, and Seema, the owner of the restaurant, Miel, actually came there, and I was just chatting with her, drinking coffee and eating some of the cake and stuff, and she was actually tasting one of the cakes Karri was making. And I had mentioned it, and out of nowhere, she's like, oh, you could use the barn. I was like, oh no, now I have to do it.
You had your pop-up in your front yard where you invited neighbors and other people that had come to some of Karri's cake pop-up groups. Then you decided to have one at a local restaurant area down the street. And tell me the outcome of what that led to, or did it lead to anything?
We were thinking about it. I'm like, it's kind of inconvenient. Where would we do it? We can't really do an official one in the front yard. Not in a big way. So that really was the impetus to that. We went out there and really kind of blew away our expectations. First, I have an incredible community of friends and family, and they decided to come up and just volunteer their time and help out. So we had more people than we knew what to do with just helping out. One of our neighbors is a anesthesiologist, and he was making tortillas for 3 hours, which I thought was pretty amazing.
And you advertised most of that. You just kind of put it on your Instagram page, correct?
The feedback was fantastic. We didn't really do broad advertising on this one. So we were really pleased with the feedback and outcome of that. The individuals enjoyed the food. They said that they would come back to another one. Because of my data background, we've been collecting information data from the very beginning, starting with Karri's cakes. And then
using the QR codes?
Yeah. Just to understand what we're doing well, what we're doing wrong. So we've made some great modifications to that. So love the ability to sort of drive more insights and improvements using data. And from there, another friend of Karri's that owns a shop in Germantown gave us an opportunity to be at another pop-up for Small Business Saturday. So we're excited about that one. It's going to be a little bit smaller scale in that we're going to have fewer things we're going to offer, but we're going to do, I think, maybe a little bit more tighter job putting those pieces out there. So yeah, excited about it.
The pop-up you had recently, what were the hours? You ran from noon?
We ran from 1 to 4 p.m. So definitely not lunch hours, but we wanted to have enough time in the morning to get things ready and let people, finish their morning routine.
Do you have a count on how many tacos you actually sold?
Yeah, we sold just under 200 tacos. We sold about 60 slices of cake. Tteokbokki was kind of new, probably 20 to 25. A bunch of shirts that we had made out there. So that's a really good offering considering, we didn't really advertise the event.
So tell me what your plans are moving forward. Do you have any significant plans? Are you still kind of experimenting to try to decide what you want to do?
I tend to not do things small scale. So I've spent the better part of 100 hours putting a business plan together, putting my MBA to use finally after a decade. So I'm feeling very happy with the business plan. I'm spending some time putting all the financials, the pro formas, profit loss statements, and assumptions together. I'll have that done over the next 24 hours. And then we're also exploring a few spaces, one up at one city and then another one that's downtown that may be really great places for us to start. And then depending on the scale, potentially looking for some partners or investors to kind of go on this journey with us.
If there was someone out there wanting to learn how to make some creations, some tacos, Korean tacos, or any of the other recipes that you have, could you give them any advice?
Yeah, actually, there's a really cool cookbook called Cook Korean by Robin Ha. She's actually an illustrator. She does a lot of comics, but she's also Korean, and she's put together these really amazing recipes. And I don't follow these word for word, and some of these are a bit different than how I would approach it, but it's a really great way to get an introduction into how to cook some of the more notable or recognizable foods in Korea. I can put some recipes together. I don't like the idea of having secret recipes and information. So even my, amazing coffee recipe or any of these things, I'll share recipes with anyone that's interested in learning.
But it's obvious from what you said, experimentation, you can't make the same recipe twice. Even two different people are probably going to make it different because it's going to taste different, right?
Yeah, well, I have been writing my recipes down a lot more these days. And, that's one of the other beauties of cooking too, right? There's no perfect recipe, because if there's a recipe that's perfect for me based on my tastes and flavors, it's going to be a little bit off for somebody else, because I love spice and somebody else may love sweet, or I love, more of the vinegars and somebody actually may love something very different. So these recipes that I make, they're getting more and more perfect to my tastes. But yeah, sure, this is a really good jumping off point, the book that I mentioned. And then you start tweaking it over time to make it your own.
Is there any way that people can find out more about what you're working on, about your coffees, about your Asian tacos, or any of the other recipes?
We have a simple website. We've been so busy that we have not done anything with it. It's tacodiplomacy.com, which I was blown away that URL was still available.
Well, I have to ask you, how did you come up with that name?
Taco diplomacy, it's a really cool concept, because international food is very unapproachable for so many people, certainly in Middle Tennessee or the South, that don't tend to be very adventurous in their cooking. But legitimately everybody loves a taco. So by introducing unfamiliar foods and flavors in a familiar form, I believe you actually expose more people. You have the opportunity to expose more people to flavors. And there's no better way to introduce a person to a different culture than through their stomach and through their food. We were just talking through that. I'm like, yeah, this is taco diplomacy. I was like, oh my gosh, it sounds pretty good. Let me check if the URL is available. And before I even thought about starting a restaurant, I bought the URL. I think I own 30 or 40 URLs right now, most of which will do nothing. Beyond that, we're also on Instagram and Facebook. You can find us on taco.diplomacy on Instagram and Facebook.
And so any future pop-ups would also be on there if someone wanted to come and try out one of your tacos.
They will. And if you find my wife, she's Karri Bakes Cake on Instagram, and get onto her mailing lists. Generally, anytime she has a cake tasting at home, it's a free slice of cake as she's exploring. You could also come in and I'll make you a nice latte as well.
Well, this was wonderful. Thank you so much for giving me the time to interview you for the Creative Push, and I wish you all the best with what you have coming up.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for listening. As always, my intention is to offer inspiration that excites you to want to get out there and create something amazing. Be sure to check out some of the other episodes. There's more information below in the show notes, including links to other great stories, tips, and resources. Drop me a message or comment at any time, and I hope that you'll sign up to be a part of this creative tribe.